Thank you, Yoko, as always, for everything, and Nina as well. Well, it's such a pleasure to have our friend Nandini back with us, even if it's only virtually. We just wish we could have her back more often. But Nandini's been one of our favorite people as she's moved through the world. She's, as you all know, she did her PhD here at JCU and did extremely well. Nandini's won so many awards for her research and conservation initiatives. It's a little difficult to remember them all, but I do recall she received a very prestigious Royal Bank of Scotland Earth Heroes Award. And then more recently, she's been received a GQ recognition for being one of the 25 most important people in India, which, by the way, is a subcontinent with about, what, 1.4 billion people. So that's doing quite well. Nandini, when she was at JCU, she won the Outstanding Thesis Award for her PhD, which of course is fantastic. And then she received two postdoc offers, at least two that I know of, one at the University of Cambridge and one at Columbia University. And then it became a very difficult time for Nandini to decide which of those two postdocs she wanted to take. And in the end, she chickened out. And she decided she wanted the one at Columbia. So she had to rely on me to call up the guy at Cambridge and tell him that Nandini was backing out as she stood there and chickened out at a critical moment. Anyway, that's some of Nandini's latest doing. She's back in India and she's now working at the Ministry of Environment and Forestry there and doing lots of good things that she's always doing, extremely active, very persuasive and interesting person, really making a difference in the world. So it's fantastic to have Nandini Velho here with us. Thank you, Nandini.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks everybody. And to say that I'm excited, anxious, and really looking forward to this talk is an understatement. As Bill was saying, I never actually wanted to fledge from the Lawrence lab, and here I am. So it never felt good to leave, but actually it does feel good to come back here and present to all of you. And I'm grateful to all of you for this opportunity. So I'm going to be talking a bit about my PhD and life after my PhD. And this is what it's going to be about. So when you look at ecoregions from across the world, the 16 regions that exist in the world, they have varying degrees of protection. So if you look at this map by Deniston et al. In 2018, there are ecoregions which have a lot of green and dark green, which means that nature has the potential to come back in some of these areas. And there is a lot of red where there has been a lot of tree loss from the year 2000 to 2014, roughly the same time where I did my PhD. And if you look at the Eastern Himalaya Biodiversity Hotspot, which is in the blue right here, you see that there are three different scenarios. Basically, the scenario where nature, in light green, where nature could reach half its protected area status, where nature could actually recover. There's a bit of orange that you can't see very well. And yet there is a nature that is extremely threatened, which is what you see in the red. And that is essentially the premise of what my PhD was about, where in the Eastern Himalaya Biodiversity Hotspot that I pointed out in the last slide, protected areas continue to be degraded. And this is much like the trends that we see from across the world. So for instance, there was a recent study in Science in 2020, which showed that 32% of protected area lands face intense human pressure. And this is somewhat true in the Eastern Himalaya Biodiversity Hotspot that I study in. And more so, community managed lands, which are often adjacent to protected areas, continue to be logged, farmed, and degraded and face a more intense form of human land use. And so my PhD was basically looking at what is in the green here, that where are species that are important for biodiversity conservation? How do they differ in the way they are found in protected areas and community managed lands. And what I am going to show you in the blue is the element of time. How has a protected area changed over time? And that is essentially what I've been doing with a small bit of what I've been doing with life after my PhD. So specifically coming to the question of space. So broadly, I had three main questions. The first question was, what are the merits of government control land, that is lands that are designated as protected areas, which include national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, tiger reserves, versus what are the merits of community managed lands, where lands are owned and forests are owned by different tribal communities. In the place that I work in, there are 26 different tribes. And how do they manage their lands? And what are the merits of both these types of management for biodiversity conservation? Specifically, under that broad question, what I looked at was how does the occurrence of a wide range of hunted species change across these two regimes of protected areas versus community managed lands? And what were the perceptions of residents about wildlife in these two regimes? So specifically, the study that I did was in the northeastern state of Arunachal Pradesh. It has a wide altitudinal range, and it's an important site for protection, not only because of the fantastic biodiversity that it has, which I will show you shortly, but also that 60% of the forests in this state, which is one of the states that has India's highest forest cover, is managed by different tribal communities. So these are actually some of Bill's pictures to the left when he came and he met me and spent a lot of time with me in my field site with just how life is in Arunachal Pradesh. This is some of the biodiversity that I was talking about. So for instance, the bird to the left here was the first bird to be described after India's independence, and it's called the Bugun leochikla. And it is a critically endangered bird species. So far, there are only 6 known breeding pairs of individuals that are found in the world, and it happens to be found only on community managed lands that we know. And there's a whole range of other wildlife when you look at it in terms of the global importance. As a landscape, in terms of bird diversity, it comes second to the eastern slopes of the Andes. So roughly what I did for my PhD was that I contrasted protected areas and community managed lands using 3 main methods. The first method that I used was using the road as a backbone, simply because of the logistics of what was actually present there. And these are an example of some of the conditions that I had to work in and I continue to work in. So I had transects in protected areas and community managed lands using a stratified random sampling method. I used a combination of camera traps and also semi-structured interviews. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm sort of just going to use this as my methods and what I did as a broad overarching framework, because being part of the Lawrence Lab, a lot of what I had to do was also publish some of these studies. So I'll just get to what I found from my PhD. So as I was talking about, some of the sampling frameworks that I had to use were often determined by the logistics of the area. So that in a landslide, this was how people actually had, the people on my team actually had to clear it out. And this often took days to make things happen. I did get by with my PhD and with all the work that I do with a lot of help from the people on field. And this has by no stretch of imagination been just an effort that I have single-handedly undertaken, but it's almost been a community that has seen me through, of different ages too. And I remember that the man here to the left was my very long-standing field assistant who used to come with me during field work and come to some of these crazy transects that Bill and I had decided would be in this U-shaped manner. And at the end of every day of sampling, he would tell me that today is the last day I'm going to come out with you. But life has come around, and much has changed between us, which I will talk about a bit later. This is what fieldwork, Arunachal Pradesh in Northeast India, where I work, has been special to me for multiple reasons, because I've been working there ever since I've actually visited there ever since I was 20 years old. And this was roughly a lot of my growing up, and a lot of my, if there is any sort of resilience that I've cultivated in life, has come through extensive field experience on the ground. And there have been very happy memories that I have and continue to have with this place. So this is 10 years later, when I saw my first tiger in one of the protected areas while being on foot. In terms of what my predictions from my PhD study were, they were quite straightforward. So if you look on the x-axis here, the x-axis was interpreted by collecting a lot of vegetation and human footprint variables, where I did an NMDS analysis to disaggregate, to sort of aggregate what an increasing metric of disturbance would be. On the y-axis, I have the model proportion of segments occupied, where I used a generalized linear model to predict what were the model segments occupied by different species in protected areas, which are in blue, and in community forests. So my prediction here was that as disturbance increases, I would expect to see a negative relationship in terms of the segments occupied by multiple species. And I expected this to be, the slope to be more negative for community managed lands, given that they have a wider range of human disturbances that you see there. In terms of distance to road, my prediction was the inverse, where I expected that the number of signs would be more as you go further away from the road, and that to be higher for protected areas versus community forests. A little more about the methods and all are in this paper here. So I will get straight to the results. I'm happy to say that I have tried to use as few graphs as possible. And it's nice to sort of have your PhD going, because then you can also have your PhD published and all of that, because then you can also look at your results and present them in funner ways. So this is a road. So imagine, these are the results from my PhD. So this is a road going through a protected area. In the blue is the protected area. In the orange are community managed lands. To the right here are undisturbed forests in the protected area. Here to the bottom right, here in the orange, is undisturbed forests in the community managed lands. These were the sort of disturbances in the community managed lands. And the disturbance in the protected area that I saw was very different from that of the community managed lands. It was more like bamboo regenerating, given that there were signatures of past logging that had happened in the area. So that's disturbed bamboo forest in the protected area, that's disturbed forest in the community managed lands, and that's undisturbed forest in the protected area and community managed lands. So coming to my results, for large-bodied species like the elephant, I found that they responded more to disturbance, and they were in undisturbed forests of the protected area. Roads didn't seem to matter very much to them. For the gaur, which is compare it. It belongs to the same family as the banteng in the Indo-Malayan that is found in Malaysia. And it weighs roughly about 1,000 kgs. And it is heavily hunted, and it's a heavily hunted herbivore. It was found far away from roads in some of the bamboo forests of the protected area. And so was the sambar. The sambar is another large-bodied deer species that was found, again, away from roads in recovering bamboo forests of the protected area. For other species like the Himalayan black bear, which I'm presenting some of the results in a decreasing order of the weight of species, body size. So this is the Himalayan black bear, and the Himalayan black bear was found in undisturbed forests of the protected area. So also the Himalayan serow. Again, smaller bodied species like wild pigs were found in undisturbed forests, but further away from roads, and seemed to be hunted quite a bit. Barking deer too showed similar patterns. And there was species of small cats like the leopard cat and the marble cat, basically, that were found close to roads and were almost ubiquitous in their distribution. So also the porcupine and other species. So the second part of my PhD also involved speaking to quite a few people to understand what the hunting practices were, and could you map some of the taboos and hunting practices to explain how species are represented in space. So what I found from some of the interviews that I did was that if you look here on this graph, on the x-axis is your body mass in kgs, on your y-axis is the average abundance trend. So when you look at 0 here, if a lot of people said that, in the last 10 years, when I asked them in the last 10 years, did species increase, decrease, or increase, decrease, or were roughly the same? So if there was a species that was 0, it indicated no change. +1 indicated an increase. -1 indicated a decrease, and -2 indicated a drastic decrease. So what you can see here is basically in the protected area, what people said was as body mass increased, there was a slightly positive trend, which indicates that larger bodied species were found more in the protected area, roughly very similar to what I found from my transects and my camera trapping. In the community managed lands, there was the opposite trend, where there was a decrease in larger bodied species. And I haven't presented some of the work today, but there were a large range of smaller bodied species that were critically endangered that were found in the community managed lands. So the take-home messages from what I've presented now was that in protected areas, there were large and hunted species, while in community managed lands, there were smaller species. And the response to roads and disturbances and past disturbance and the habitat mosaics that exist are largely variable and species specific. So long story short, that was what gave me a PhD. That was what gave me almost the time of my life in Cairns. And I was looking at, where my PhD degree certificate was, because I never returned to get it. And I couldn't find it. I couldn't actually find a scan of it online. So I must ask my father about where it is. But basically, I never came back because after my PhD, the community there where I work with had a PhD graduation ceremony for me, along with the forest department. And I felt that this was the most special graduation ceremony I could have ever imagined. So life after PhD this is fast forward to life after my PhD, and it has involved a lot of translating of some of the research that I have done, team expansion, and multiple other aspects. So I thought I would pick up three main examples of showing how some of the work and some of the findings of mapping where these species were, which species were hunted, how that research has been translated into efforts at on-ground protection. So this picture was a picture of a red panda that I got from my from my PhD while camera trapping, and from the community managed lands where the Bugun Leochikla was found. The community obviously was very excited about this picture, and so was I. And that resulted in, along with a lot of other work that has gone on, that has resulted in multiple meetings with people from the community and different stakeholders from the community. Details of that process can be found here, but it's basically years of just talking to people and talking more to people, and asking them where important species are found, showing them where some of the species that we are interested in and of conservation concern are found, and rationalizing some of the boundaries there, have resulted in creation of a 17 square kilometer community reserve, where it's called the Singchung Bugun Village Community Reserve, where for the first time the critically endangered Bugundio Chikla finally has a home that is formally protected. There used to be people from all across the world that used to come to these community managed lands to see this special bird species, especially a lot of twitchers and a lot of birders. But now the home of this Bugundio Chikla is protected within the Singchung Bugun Village Community Reserve, which is adjacent to Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary. And this was also the same path that I got some of the red panda photograph. This has been this is the village head. He's called the Gaon Buddha. Basically, he's the village leader. And this has resulted in us forming an advisory board, a management committee with the forest department. And with the forest department, the Bugun community and multiple stakeholders to build anti-poaching camps. So this is the Gaon Buddha inaugurating the first anti-poaching camp there. The little red panda photo that I showed you has become part of a logo of the Singchung Bugun Village Community Reserve, along with that of the Bugun Leochikla. And this is a friend of mine who is part of the patrolling committee there, patrolling squad there, who loves this logo and loves the red panda and the Bugun Leochikla so much that this is him drawing it out on one of the t-shirts that he was going to wear for a volleyball competition. And that's Lucky. And Lucky is part of 10 people who are now employed by the Forest Department, supported by the Wildlife Conservation Society of India and Rainforest Trust, that patrol some of these forests. And they are a great addition to Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary, which only had 3 frontline anti-poaching staff. So some of these anti-poaching staff now help patrol the protected area as well as the community reserve. This group of 10 people includes 9 men and 1 woman. And this is one of my students, Shalina Fia, who has made this wonderful film. She is from the Bugun community, which is roughly only 2,000 people. So not only do they protect a critically endangered bird, but they have a critically endangered language, and they are a critically endangered, anthropologists say that they have a critically endangered number of people left in the tribe. So this is Shalina. She is she's part of the patrolling squad, and she is one of the first women filmmakers from her community who has joined the forest protection team, and she's made this wonderful film called The Bugun and the Liochikla, which tells the story of the community reserve that I could share later. Shalina is also it makes me very excited and proud also to have somebody like Shalina on my team, because not only is she the first woman, but she's also a huge inspiration for other women in the community to join hands in conservation. My second example of how some of the translations from my PhD and some of the data collection from my PhD is represented in space and different outreach activities is that of the camera trapping data we collect with the forest department. This is a black panther walking on Christmas Day. 2 days later, almost taking the same, almost in the same stride is another one. And that's my friend on this, actually a couple of hours later, who is a frontline anti-poaching staff who takes the same steps there. And so there is an amazing repository of camera trapping information and camera trapping data that is in some of these areas. So another activity that I have started with the forest department and others is using putting out some of the camera trapping data to the public, not disclosing where locations are, and asking them to vote for Pake. And based on their votes for Pake, the frontline staff are given a prize by the forest department for the best camera trapping images that they get from the department. And this is a way of keeping them motivated, given that they work under very, very challenging conditions. This was started, the polling for Pake idea was started in honor actually of one of my friends who got this fantastic image of a tiger. But unfortunately, he was killed on the line of duty by a wild elephant while returning from duty on Christmas Day, because he wanted to give some chicken and meat to people who were in an anti-poaching camp. And unfortunately, when he came back, after having done so, he was killed by a wild elephant. So I thought polling for Pake would be actually a great memory, a great way to memorialize his contributions. And there have been small but tangible ways where we try to memorialize that tiger and the work of the forest guard Porotayam by holding polling for Pake and sort of creating a mascot of Pake's growling tiger. And finally, just another example I thought I'd share, and the final example of how some of the efforts of data collection have been mapped out on space was to get illustrators. So in this case, it is a close friend of mine who runs this wonderful website called Green Humor to come and represent some of Eaglenest's special biodiversity. And the people who have contributed to conservation of this area in space. So there are some of the species, like for instance, the red panda is here, the Bugun Liochukla is here. I think that's supposed to be me collecting data. And multiple other things are happening on this map. But basically, this is a representation of space. It has been very well received by the community, and this is placed in the Nature Interpretation Center that exists around Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary. And then a lot of the time that I actually spent while collecting data during my PhD and the times before also made me realize that there are a lot of unique events that had happened in this area. So some of the older people that I spoke to would often tell me about how the Dalai Lama, so this is actually a picture here of the young Dalai Lama, who is on this white horse, escaping and fleeing Tibet in 1959. So a lot of older people would tell me about, how the Dalai Lama has visited this area, and he may have passed through Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary, but nobody was really sure. And I was very motivated by the biodiversity that I saw, and that used to keep me invigorated. But at the same time, I was also very curious about what do these areas look back at in time. So that's when I decided to, after my PhD, to do this small project called the Eaglenest Memory Project, where some of the insights of some of the events that my team would share with me, I started to piece together with the understanding that a lot of people actually knew a lot. So what were the events that happened, of the what, why, the what and the where, and the when. What is it that people knew, and I started to build a list of the events and what was known. And I also started to then build a conceptual model based on these two papers. Basically, how do people remember? So are there any specific personal experiences that tie to remembering? And then it's not only about events, knowing and remembering, but how do you create a logical relationship to the sort of nostalgia, the reminiscence that you have, to create a story, to create a narrative out of this. So the broad question that I addressed about the time aspect was that how do people remember the forests that they protect? Specifically, how do we recreate the missing links of the history of Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary? And what are the memorabilia, what are the visual artifacts and memories that are related to this area? Many people might ask, and a lot of people might say, hey, what's a wildlife biologist doing with the Eaglenest Memory Project? And why does this process matter? Why it matters is that you will see in a lot of that, in some of the examples that I show you later, that there is this wonderful term called the past in the presentness. So basically, in whatever you see in the present, there is obviously a huge aspect of the past that spatially creates some of these landscapes. And when I went and I started to tell people that, I want to do the Eaglenest Memory Project, similar to a reaction that another researcher had got doing something related to a memory project, but related to war. A lot of them asked me, what took you so long? And they asked Kaur et al. In 2017, why have you come so late? So coming back to why does this matter? It also matters in the context of India, because India, given the partition of India and Pakistan, there has been the largest movement of people that have been displaced by the separation of these two countries. And so not all stories are told equally. And there are also a lot, again, similar to the parallels of forest conservation, there are also not all stories told equally by all stakeholders. So in a lot of the work that I did in the past, women, for instance, didn't really get the chance to talk about what they would have liked to talk. And some of the meanings that forests have and how they are important in people's lives don't only have meanings for biodiversity conservation or livelihoods in the present terms, but they have multiple other reasons that are political and social in nature. So that was that has been one of the motivations for the Eaglenest Memory Project. It was another personal motivation was that it was a great time to be in field. and spent time in field. And it was like almost looking at a forest, again, with new eyes, figuring out where were old orchard trees planted before people were relocated to other areas. And this is us actually collecting a lot of fruit, a lot of pomelos, to give to people in the villages. And this is right in the middle of the protected area, something that I had completely overseen during my PhD. Small little rocks, the rocks that you would otherwise just be able to pass by. This I discovered with the Shedukpen tribe was actually a measuring chart, a height measuring chart for children in the times gone by, where their parents would tell them, stand against this rock and let's see how tall you are. It was a great opportunity to understand what some of the lost crafts were. So this is one of the last honey collectors from the Shedukpen tribe, Chumbi Megeji and his wife, who were telling me about the story, the songs they sing to the honey guide, which is a bird that is associated with the tribe and honey collection, and the traditional tools they use of bamboo, made from bamboo, to collect honey in the least destructive way. So my sampling design here in this case involved using open-ended and semi-structured questions, working with an artist who had spent substantial time with me in field and interpreted and translated some of these drawings with the community, and then sharing transcripts and the illustrations back with the people from the community. So these were some of the findings from the Eaglenest Memory Project. So, for instance, this is Kaibu Piang, one of the oldest village priests. This is him old now. This is him a handsome man in his younger days, when he was a village head priest who looked like this and would conduct some of these rituals of animism and animal sacrifice. Until he met the Dalai Lama as the village head priest, and some of the Dalai Lama's teachings were very influential to his thought process. And slowly, what they started to do was that the Bugun community started to reconcile some of their practices with respect to animism and Buddhism. And this was the last time an animal was sacrificed during the Dinko festival. So here, actually, the animal is not being sacrificed. Instead, there's just a small bit of red paint that is put between its forehead, and then the goat is left. And this has also had huge downstream effects for forest conservation, where a lot of people have stopped hunting and stopped consuming wild meat, given the cohabitation of these two religious practices. The Eaglenest Memory Project, the second really important finding and really an interesting insight that helped me, I got to understand, was this was one of the places where I used to have my transects, and the reason it looked like this, and the reason that there was a lot of bamboo, was that in 20 years ago, there used to be there was army presence, and a lot of presence of a lot of people. There are old records of people saying that even spies from China would be here, but there was presence of the army, so it also involved use of this area. And once upon a time, which was basically 25 years ago, this is the electoral roll of India's most remote polling station, which was right in the middle of Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary. So basically, it involved this huge operation of taking trucks and clearing landslides that I showed you in some pictures before, to get an EVM for 3 people to vote. Basically, 3 people to vote in the middle of Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary. Another interesting finding from the Eaglenest Memory Project is the road that I showed you, right? That had a lot of those landslides and required people to manually clear those landslides. Roughly 20 years ago, there was a plan to build a highway through the protected area and make it a tarred double road. And when the committee of the Supreme Court came to visit this area, what they found here was the committee was stopped by a group of elephants that was giving birth, where the female was giving birth, and the elephants had completely cordoned the road off, the small little road that we see today. And that was one of the reasons that was the central reason why the road didn't become a highway. And this is a picture actually one of the Supreme Court committee members showed me of how they had to wait hours to watch this female give birth. And this was a picture of the placenta of the elephant. So all these interesting findings, the core question still remained about, I had these wonderful drawings that I worked with the community and these illustrators and this artist with, and I had shared the transcripts back, but how would I take some of these results forward? So what I did was that I wrote an article about the Eaglenest Memory Project in one of India's most widely read social science journals. There was a website that younger people from the community could access. And then I thought, is it actually possible to have a small book that serves as an artifact for people from the community to take back? And I think this is one of those things that they never tell you in grad school, but it was an extremely painful process where it took me about I had all this field work that I had done. I had a grant and I had my website and everything going and my article done. But it took me about four years to finally get a small publisher, to agree to publish this book. One, it was difficult to find a publisher. Two, it was expensive to print this book because it had a lot of illustrations, it had a lot of photographs, but I really wanted to do it. So these are some of the pictures of the Eaglenest Memory Project. So for instance, these are old names of places around Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary. These are some of the artifacts. It gave me a wonderful opportunity to also speak to a lot of women who had extremely defining roles with the forest, to spend time with them, get them to share some of their stories. And it was not a large book. It was a book that is about 100 pages. But finally, it did see the light of day. WWF agreed to publish it. And there was a foreword from the Union Forest Minister of India, written for this book, which was extremely special for the Bugun community, which was a very small community, which, as I said before, is just 2,000 people. So where did I want to have the book release? Everybody was like, why do you not want, is the book release going to happen in the WWF main office in India's capital city, New Delhi? And I was like, no. The most special place that I'd want to have the book release was back with the community and the people who helped me create this book, which were roughly actually 98 contributors from the 3 different communities. And so I released it back in Eaglenest Wildlife Sanctuary. So that was Chumbi Megaji, some of the contributors. This is him when the book finally got published. Unfortunately, that was his wife to the right. By the time the book got published, his wife never got to see it because she had passed on. But Chumbi was thrilled to see his picture, to see some of his stories. in the book. And finally, this project in some way and my PhD, I felt, was set free, where I released the Eaglenest Memory Project back with the people who had helped me, in the process. And I decided that my chief guests would not be, a lot of people were like, is it going to be the ministers who are going to come? But I said they can be in the audience, but my chief guests were the oldest living members of all three communities, the Bugun community, the Shedupen community, who helped me set the Eaglenest Memory Project free. And I finally thought that Saila Baje, the man on the right who came with me throughout my PhD and said, this is the last day I'm coming with you. When he finally saw the Eaglenest Memory Project, he came up to me, and I had obviously stories about him. He came up to me and he did say that I understand why you did those transects then, and I understand why you've spoken and told me these stories now. So I'd like to thank a lot of people who helped me with my PhD. As I was saying before, there were about 98 people who contributed to the Eaglenest Memory Project. There was involvement of the forest department, the different village councils, and several people who have helped me along the way. And thank you again for inviting me. It almost feels like I've come back home, and in some sense I'm happy that I have fledged, and I've had you all cheering on for me during this process.